Namaskar, this is Professor Aman Agarwal from Indian Institute of Finance, and we are here assembled again today at 12 noon to discuss and have an interview of an expert on the area of essence of life and growth. Today our guest is Dr. Aarti Grover from School of Planning and Architecture. Before I introduce her, I would like to brief everybody about the disclaimers. We are conducting this meeting in accordance with the guidelines laid down by the Ministry of Home Affairs for conducting webinars and online meetings. We will be recording this meeting, and maybe from next week onwards, these meetings will go live on YouTube and Facebook as well. Please note that everybody is requested to kindly keep their mics and audios off uh, throughout the meeting. We have a cyber head who is looking after the security issues, and in case someone switches on their video and doesn't turn it off, he will have to take you off the room. Uh, we will be taking up question and answers. That will be towards the end of the session. For about 20 minutes to 30 minutes, we'll have the interview and followed by 15 to 20 minutes of question and answers. And at that time, we will open up the videos and audios. You are requested to kindly raise your hand at that time. I see the hand raised by Dr. Pooja Bardwaj. Kindly do not raise your hand just to put your name on the top. We have come to know that this is a strategy being used by a lot of people to just put their names up for the purpose of attendance. Request you to kindly keep your raise your hands only after the question answer session is expected to be there. I will announce before what is there. I am not taking any questions as of now, so you're requested to kindly lower your hands for the time being. We have a dynamic young girl here who is from India, from Delhi. She is working with the Department of Landscape Architecture in School of Planning and Architecture, which is Deemed University in Delhi, a very prestigious school for architectural studies. She is also an advisor to the Central Zoo Authority of India, which looks after all the zoos in the country. She is also working on large number of projects for the President of India, which is for landscaping the presidential estate. As you would know, the presidential estate runs in over 300 acres of land in the heart of Delhi. But she has been assigned, if I understand correctly, to look after the landscaping of the area which is nearer to the president's house and are surrounding the president's house and maybe more. So just a brief introduction as I did, and I will pass the mic to Aarti in a second. Before that, I welcome you all, and I look forward for a discussion. Aarti, just give me a second so that I can put you on the spotlight, and then we can begin the discussion. Yes, very good morning and good afternoon, Aarti. Now, Aarti, we're here to talk about the essence of life and growth. I would love to see that landscaping coming in from somewhere or the other in our discussion today. But as I said, and I briefed you, we are looking at a positive outlay of what we expect and what we have gained. As I said before, we do bring in 2 to 3 people, one person every week, who is a young person meaning people who have minimum of 10 years of experience and below 20 years of experience, so that we can get a holistic picture of what people from different age groups are actually looking at life and growth as. And as we begin, Aarti, you have attended some of our sessions in the past. I would like to know your perspective of what do you take life and what do you take growth as before you outline the essentials.
Hi, hello, Professor, and a very good afternoon to all the participants who have joined in, and thanks for sparing your time to come and join us in the discussion today. And I think before I speak on anything, I must grab this opportunity to congratulate and appreciate Professor Aman and the IIF team to have organized this webinar series where people from all walks of life have been sharing their thoughts. And also, I feel really indebted to you for having me speak on this extremely relevant topic of essence of life and growth. You know, if you ask me how do I see life, so, you know, I am 43, I'm going to be 43, and seen some ups and downs of life till now. So life to me is a beautiful experience of the creation of God. You know, I think we were all sent down to earth to enjoy every bit of what comes our way. Uh, it was simple till some decades ago. But for most of us today, I believe life has become really complicated and, you know, filled with deadlines and targets and work pressures. But I believe wise are those who can balance this rush, you know, with the forgotten essence of life, which is relations, relaxation, and rejuvenation. I'll tell you a small story before I, you know, because it relates to the fundamental of life, how I see it. I read a story some time back and I thought that relates to the principle really well. So, you know, there was this scholar who traveled all the way to India when he was told that there lives a sage in the hills of Indian subcontinent who is blessed with the greatest knowledge and a blissful life. So the scholar, you know, reaches the sage's ashram after a great deal of toil and effort and gets to meet him. Now, you know, he asks him the most difficult question. He says, I'm told that you know the deepest secrets of life and existence. Please tell me, what is life? You know, the sage smiles at him and says, life, my friend, is a poem. It's full of flowers, fragrances, and rippling waters. It's a pure pleasure. You know, the boy is shocked. He goes silent and nods in disagreement. He says, but my learned guru has told me that life is full of misery. You must tread each step really carefully or you'll be thrown to hell and subjected to unbearable pain. Who do I believe, you or my guru? The sage smiles back at him and says, he's right and so am I. That's his life and this is mine. So life is what you make of it. You know, we are all born with a clean slate and what we write on it defines each one of us in a unique way, I believe. You know, it's one's own actions, one's own deeds that determine what results will we reap or what results will the life give us. You know, Socrates, Buddha, Kalam, Gandhi, Kabir, all successful, all different shades. The choice has to be your own, what you want to do with your life. Also, now you asked me, the second thing was growth. You said, what is growth? I believe grabbing opportunities and making a correct decision actually, you know, shows what your growth graph would be. And growth, I believe, is a multi-dimensional subject, and it may have, you know, different meanings and multiple connotations for all of us. Also, I think it's important, you know, I believe growth will keep happening. You are bound to physically grow, but are you mentally and spiritually growing according to the pace of life? That's very important. And if the answer of this question comes as a yes, then I think it is reflected in a refined and a developed society. And if most of the individuals of a society fail to do so or fail to get this answer in a yes, I think it reflects very strongly on the society as well. You know, our duty, I believe, when we are born once, our duty as individuals is to be in the present and do whatever we can best do with our present. And the future will, you know, blossom itself. You know, there is a small anecdote which I was just reading yesterday sometimes. So I thought I would just narrate. You know, once there was a person who went to Taj Mahal to see the Taj Mahal. For my international friends, I'll just tell you that Taj Mahal is a very famous monument in India that we all want to go and see. So he was there for some time and he was continuously taking pictures over pictures, pictures and pictures, more pictures. So, you know, another person who was standing just close by, he was observing this guy taking pictures and not even looking at the monument. So he goes up to him and he asks him, dear guy, dear person, you must have come from a little far to see this monument and you are just not looking at him. You're only clicking pictures, at least have some time to see it. You know, he hastily replied, that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing. When I go back home, I'll see these pictures at ease. This is exactly what we are doing with our lives today, missing all the opportunities completely. You know, and we are actually trying to make our good future, fill money in our accounts for the future, which is unknown. I think the best way to live life, or the essence of life for me, is to be in present. Do what you are meant to do today, and your future will become beautiful itself. As they say, life begins, when fear ends. We are very fearful of what we are doing. Is that right? Is that wrong? I think even today, when it's a little gloomy and slow, this applies a lot more, that we keep doing our work. We keep doing what we can at this point of time. Somebody, very rightly said that you need little darkness to even see the stars. Keep working and hold on to it. I think this time also will end soon and we'll see the renaissance. I think just hold on to it. That's the essence.
So, given that you have a long experience in landscaping and architecture, for me as a professor of economics, I don't see much change in landscape except for some flowers growing up and going down. How do you see life there?
Uh, you know, People these days are actually very haunted by what will happen to their profession. Will they get their job back, or will they lose it? But the best thing which is happening right now to my job is that whatever remains, whatever doesn't remain, landscape will remain. As a landscape architect, let me tell you that there are not less than 8 to 9 million species on this earth, including all sorts of animals, flora, fauna, and avifauna, and little organisms which we don't even realize that they are there along with us. They are all at their best at this point of time. They are doing their best. If you see internet, you just open internet and you will see exquisite images of nature doing really well. If you see water in lakes and rivers has actually gone very clear, and the skies are bluer than ever, including our city. And the AQI readings are astonishing these days. I'm told that CPCB, Central Pollution Control Board, has gone into revising their data, the lowest data ever in the history. How I see this whole situation is that probably, when we started to develop as a society, respecting natural resources like sun, rivers, mountains has been our culture. That has been our culture. But as we started to evolve as a developed community, so to say, the way of looking at these resources changed from first utilitarian and very soon to exploitative. That's how we have been. So in recent past, we became aware of this. Last decade, or maybe 15 years back, we had realized that something is not going right. And that's where we started all those discourses on sustainability. We started to talk about sustainability, but maybe that was not enough. Maybe that was not enough. And, nature probably has thrown it back on us now, suggesting on this highly unsustainable relationship that we have kind of developed with it now. And I believe that, the environment is now in control, and it has set a reset button, and we have, exploited it more than its carrying capacities. I think this is the time to accept that we were not probably going the right path. And probably adapt in this situation, that we will now at least pledge that the sustainability will not only be in papers and in policy making, but we'll also practically implement it to get better results and to satisfy this relationship which we have with our Mother Earth.
You see, Arti, I was reading the other day in Rig Veda, and a beautiful quote came across me. And it was, for thousands and hundreds of years, if you want to enjoy the fruits and happiness of life, take up systemic planting of trees. So, there is a symbolic thing that you start planting trees, but what does it really mean for you when you look at it from the perspective of life and growth?
You say if you want to reap fruit, you must plant trees.
Yeah, systemic planting of trees. That's what they're saying. But for every one of us, systemic planting of trees is not that we start growing plants and trees and oranges and apples. Every one of us looks at it from different perspectives. So how do you see it from perspective of life and growth?
This is a very beautiful saying, and I totally believe in it. See, we are from different backgrounds. So the way I see this is, it can be actually understood in various perspectives. As an example, if I talk about the national perspective, for example, I think, any nation is what its people are, right? So if the people of a nation are young, for example, India, we call it a young nation. And if the people of a nation are happy, we call it a happy nation. So I'm saying that it all boils down to human capital. Yeah. So if it boils down to human capital, we want our nation to be educated, prosperous, and happy. So all what we do should be in that direction. And India is moving the right path, but we need to find the gaps and plug them up quickly. I mean, we have to plant those trees quickly where we are lacking. So, on an average, the median age of India is 28 right now. And so around 2/3 of our population falls in the productive group. And if 2/3 of our population falls in the productive group, we are in much in control. We are in a very happy situation. And if we want these people, all these youth, to grow into good professionals, great researchers, great economists and scientists or other things, then then this needs to be well thought of, and well drafted effort has to go into this endeavor. But I believe the gap lies in three major thrust areas. If we have to plant these trees on national level, how do you see it? I mean, of course, for this example, I would think that probably a long-term strategy of employability skills are required. We are definitely much more educated, but UNICEF has said that up to 2030, we will have 30 crores and 96 lakh people, students who would have finished 10th. But how many of them would be employable is just 47. Maybe we need to plug in quickly. We need to plant this tree quickly. And then, second, which comes to my mind is that probably technology. I was just reading this report some time back, which was by Aspiring Mind Employability Report, which says that only this is actually a very good opportunity right now, that 3.4% of our engineers are capable of software-based startups. And India wants to, we aspire to become the startup hub of the globe. So maybe we can strengthen this up a bit. Also, I think the newer dimensions of science, like artificial engineering, mobile devices, or maybe data sciences for that matter, they can all be plugged in right now. And we are right now pumping in 3.3% of our GDP into education. Maybe we can raise it to 6. That's the ideal. And the third thing which comes to my mind is R&D. Fourth, probably quality of education. So I believe, what you said is correct. In landscape also, we talk of planting trees all the time. But I think more important is that we plant the trees, but we nurture them rather well, so that they can go mature and they can become assets for the society. That typical image of a tree where it is a heavy foliage, green, shade giving, evergreen tree, that tree, if a planting is not enough. So I will rather say that if you want to reap fruit, plant trees, but nurture them more, nurture them well too.
True. I agree with you. When it's a question of planting trees, we need to take care of them. Aarti, we've been living in uncertain times. There have been uncertainties of all kinds all the time. Sometimes they're social, sometimes economical, sometimes legal. Something or the other always comes time. And lately, for the last couple of years, environmental uncertainties have been there. You have random rains, random showers, random floods, droughts, all kinds of things that happen. So when these kind of uncertainties, like we had the guest yesterday from Uzbekistan, where he said only a few days back a dam got destroyed and 70,000 people had to move from one place to the other, leaving their homes. Now that is also a kind of uncertainty which one cannot plan. We have forests burning in Australia and the US and other parts which are there, which I always say are opportunities in life. But how do you celebrate life? My question to you is, how do you go about celebrating life in these kind of uncertainties?
Yeah, that's true. I think there is no second way about it, that life is uncertain, life is unpredictable completely. And celebrating life. So what actually comes to my mind right now is that, there is data which says every morning when you get up, probably 2 crores of people don't get up the next morning. So I think if every day you can get up and you can see your heart working, your brain working, your hands working, and you can get up the bed and see the world, that is celebration. To live in the present and to feel happy about the fact that life is unpredictable, but you are alive to witness this unpredictable nature of life, that is celebrating life. We
Correct.
don't actually thank enough. We get enough, but we don't really thank enough God, because he's given us with some real good sensibilities which many other organisms do not have. And philosophically, celebrating life is actually what we should be doing, because life is unpredictable, yet things have happened good to us. And why should even we have this urge to predict life? Why should I even want to predict life? Maybe I would want to predict because I want to prepare, and I want to prepare because I am a little unsure about myself. So maybe the larger question could be that instead of predicting life and being always in stress of what will happen today, I think we should rather focus on building ourselves up into people who are ready to, embrace this unpredictable nature of life better, and we equip ourselves better so that any unforeseen circumstances, so my mind is so agile that I quickly react to the situation, or better word is respond to the situation in a positive way, and synthesize a solution quickly for myself and for my fellow mates.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can do that, because I believe life is not like in a regular exam, it's an exam without a stipulated syllabus. So you have to rather build yourself up instead of looking at what uncertainties will come my way.
True, true. You've been talking about happiness and the way happiness impacts, and when you say you want to get up and you see life and you are alive, and that's a kind of an happiness as well. So, and you deal with younger boys and girls who just come out of school. They have a different way, and you deal with them every day. You have your own self you're dealing with, and your colleagues and friends. So, how does one go about measuring life, happiness in life? Is it about growth, or something else you think which is important, which helps us measure this happiness? Yes, we are happy when we get up, but then is that the end of it? Is that what we say, okay, that's enough, I don't need more happiness? Or is there something else we need to use to measure that, okay, if I do this, if I am able to achieve this, if I am able to accomplish this, what would it be something like a growth, or would it be a spiritual aspect, or would it be something else in your opinion?
You mean, is it okay to be only happy and not grow?
No, I'm not saying, I'm not deciding for you, but I want your intake on how does one go about measuring happiness in life? It is good to say that you are happy when you're alive and you feel that you're functioning, and there are many who have not got this and you have got this and all. But then, how does one go about measuring happiness in life? Especially when you look at yourself, and then when you look at young people, which you deal with every new bunch coming, or young people coming from different walks of life into your college.
To the first part of your statement where you said, how do you measure whether you are happy or not? So, it's of course, it's a qualitative, it's a qualitative subject, where whether you are happy with money, whether you're happy with good health, whether you're happy if you're looking good, whether you're happy if your accounts are filled with money, that's all very, very subjective. And I believe that growth is actually the measure of your success in life. Some people believe, like for example, taking an example of these happy cities, which Bhutan is one of the happy cities, where if you go there, they respect their culture a lot, and You know, there are a lot of things, but the people are really happy, but are they employable? Are they doing enough? Is the economic growth enough? I mean, can we compare it to India? Not really. uh, but I believe the essence is that we need to keep a balance. There has to be a balance, because if you're happy and you're not doing anything, then that happiness is not sustained at all. But you're happy and you have created conditions in your mind which make you available to work, which make your efforts possible, then I think that is achievable. And once you achieve that, that is also reflected back into happiness. I think uh, it's a dependent, two dependent variables. One goes up, the second goes up by itself. One goes down, probably things might not change for some people. For example, there are people who have mastered this skill, whether they are in happy or sad situations, they remain happy by thinking about things they have. But there are people who have probably, that's the same situation of half glass filled and half glass empty. What do you focus at? I think what my own perspective is, keep looking at the positive side. The other half will get filled at its own pace and time. You just have to work. So stay in
True.
present and hold on to it.
True. So given that, what would be your opinion for the success mantra for tomorrow for all of us?
Sorry?
What would be the success mantra for tomorrow for all of us?
Okay. I really believe what your tomorrow will be like is exactly dependent on how you strategize your actions today. The same philosophy that you work today and tomorrow will be good. So this time, for example, when most activity is a little slow and the whole thing is a little gloomy, is actually, I believe, is the time to, for us to engage in research, and make a vision statement for all the sectors right now. And the mantra for me for tomorrow is to learn from the crisis. What is happening right now, let's quickly learn from it and invest in capacity building. And probably innovative technology, which is going to be the need of tomorrow. For example, I spoke about artificial intelligence and mobile devices and many other skills like that. We need to put more effort into those areas of life. And the effects of this, what is happening right now, of this unseen devil, they are going to be long lasting. And if they are going to be long lasting, we need to learn to live with it. We can't ignore the fact, but we can't also stop working. As you said, we have to be happy, but we'll also have to be working at the same time. So I think this situation would actually lead to some systems go obsolete completely in the newer circumstances. And also maybe there are some newer technologies and newer dimensions coming up, surfacing up because of this crisis and the new situations. I think the best mantra could be anticipate and act. Anticipate and act. Also, I think enough research in for these aspects will be required. For example, social distancing. So norms for social distancing would be for offices, for public spaces, for transport, for construction sites, for educational institutions, more than anything else, shall be required to be framed. I was just listening to one of these webinars where I heard that Griha Council has come up of late with a building fitness indicator, which is actually an app to assess our preparedness to be safe against the virus. That's exactly, I think, what is required at this point of time. Adaptive management. You just see what is happening and you quickly manage. This is the way forward. Adaptive management and anticipate and act. And Professor, this reminds me of a book actually, which I had read last year, which is called Anti-Fragile. And this book is written by a very famous author called Taleb. Some of us may have read it. This book, the author says that, in time of crisis, it's not only necessary to be resilient and robust, but it's more important that at this kind of situation we become anti-fragile as individuals and society, to actually it'll to raise to better. from the disorder. That's what the message of the book was. And I think we are also all talking about build back better. And I think this philosophy of build back different to suit the different situation that we are in should be the mantra. So if you ask me, mantra, I think adaptive management.
Mhm, mhm. I have another 2-3 questions before we end for today, and then I open the house for questions today. One of these things is that you are closely related to architecture and landscaping with the construction industry specific. And as you would have seen and observed, worldwide, the construction industry has been on a downturn for almost a decade now. And with the kind of steps taken by this government in terms of curbing NPAs and the deliverables which are not taking place, a lot of people, who had invested in taking a house for themselves, for their livelihood, who had invested their life money in it. And so there have been a large number of cases given that. And suddenly we have this uncertainty, another uncertainty, humanly built or otherwise, on our heads. However, the IMF has come out with some figures, and it says 1.9% growth is expected in this year, whereas different agencies varying from 1.7% to 4% of GDP growth is expected in 2020, which is January to December 2020, that is calendar year. And then 7.4% for the year 2021, and that's what they're projecting. Now, as a person who is not directly related with the economy per se, but then who does bear the fruits of an economy, how do you see this information, and does it really make sense? Do you feel, given what you see with your consultants, your clients, and you deal with, do you feel these figures or estimates are realistic, or they provide hope, or they are pessimistic in nature? What do you think?
Yeah, IMF had talked about 1.9%, but and 7.4%. You're right, but I'm not an economist. Of course, you may be a better person to answer this question. But if you ask me as a practitioner, as somebody who actually bears the indirect fruit of all this, and as an aware citizen, whatever best I can actually answer this question to would be that. As I see, as an Indian, if I see the American and European countries, they kept economy at the top. Even today, for them, economy is at the top. But yeah, India's numbers may be a little, not really happy at this situation. But our approach is much more wholesome. The first statement that our Honorable Prime Minister in this time of crisis, he said, "Jaan hai to jahan hai."
True.
Which conveyed aloud our values and his love for and his concern for his countrymen. I believe, this thing that, we have a stable and a very strong political condition in the center at this point of time is an extraordinary leadership at the top. I have been watching these mainstream news channels these days a lot, because we are all actually doing the same. We are at home, lockdown, nothing else to do. So I was just going through some channel, and it was talking about the ways of other presidents and prime ministers at this point of time. Everybody is trying to settle down the economic issues. Everybody is talking about that. But please look at the way our prime minister has connected with the public. I mean, his emotional connect with the public. Each time he comes and with folded hands, he will tell us, "Main chahta hu aap aisa karein." He wants us to do something and support him. And we are all with him. Yesterday I was reading a report which says 87% of urban Indians have approved his ways of handling the crisis. That says everything of how we are going about it. I can't really close eyes to the fact that there are disruptions at multiple levels, and which state we are in right now, these disruptions are there and are going to be there for some time. For how many years, how many months, I'm not the real person to talk about this. But if you look at these disruptions, I can actually count 3 to 4 right now. One is, of course, the urban life disruptions, what we are seeing right now. And if you talk about urban life disruptions, the most hit class or the most hit category of people is the informal sector. is the poor migrant workers, which we saw off late the end of last month. We were seeing these people moving out of Delhi and metros to back to their places. It was shocking also to realize that so many people were engaged in doing something to our economy when we didn't even notice them. But now, if you ask me today, government is doing their bit. There are going to be short-term and long-term answers to how you look at their needs, the needs of the migrant poor, the urban poor, and the informal sector. There, I have thought about it because this is my industry, and I thought maybe in short term what the governments are doing is fine. They are actually providing them food, shelter, and they are doing counseling, which is actually extremely important for that category at this point of time when they have lost their jobs. They don't have anything to eat. They are parted away from their families, so the stress, we can't even imagine. I was hearing Sadhguru, Jaggi Vasudev is a mystic, is an Indian mystic, and he was saying that so many Indian people are getting devoid of food at this point of time. I just wish that they get something to eat. That's what his concern is at this point of time. This is Indian value. I'm just saying because I read it. As far as planning model is concerned, I believe that is the long-term strategy and the fully secured strategy to handle such a situation for migrant workers, where I believe what would be important is that public health becomes central to urban management. Public health will have to become central to urban management, and this calls for a robust and reliable database. Now, for getting this information, you will have to empower the urban local bodies. I mean, if you ask me, public indicators will need to be incorporated into it. And if you have to do this, real data is required. We don't have that real data right now. We'll have to go to these places, figure out this data, compile this data, assess this data, and only then some policy will be in place.
True, true.
If you ask me second, the economic disruption, then I think the strategy should be to depend on what is already there and go into a consumption mode rather than investment mode right now, at least for some time, till we actually take hold of things and take charge of things better. So I think again the formula of anticipate and prevent would help us. And probably instead of reacting and curing like other countries are doing at this point of time, I believe it's okay to be a little slow than never. And I believe the third thing, which I can't finish this one before I speak about and applaud the health and security sector, which how we are dealing it right now, the role of digital media and the digital systems in this point of time, especially in spreading awareness, I believe is great, and it needs an applaud. The second important thing which comes to my mind is the way how our government hospitals, government airlines, and government doctors have actually shouldered this responsibility is great. Then the smaller IT section, they are doing to come up with an app in no time is not a joke. I mean, we are up there. The only thing is that I see this will take time. It will take time for all other countries as well. So we are not away from the situation, but we are catching it up quickly.
So I will be opening the house, and I will request everyone who wants to ask a question to kindly raise their hands. So my last question to you would be, two questions as a matter of fact. One is, do you think life is all about money and power? Because that's what the newspapers project.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Is life all about money and power? Because that's what newspapers, media projects all the time.
If it was about money and power, then I don't think, no, I mean, I think it's a balance. It's a balance. You need money and you need power, some sort of power to, exercise your existence into this world, because unless you have power in hand, nobody, your juniors also won't listen to you. But it's not about money and power. It's about so that much money and power that can give you content. I mean, if my house is in a working condition, I have something to eat, I have my resources to go to office and work, is something which is required. And more than that, I think is a burden. Is a burden. If I have five flats to myself, and if I have 25 crore rupees in each account I have, the only thing I am doing is to manage them. Maybe I'll leave them here and die one day. And who will use that 25 crores in each account, probably 10 accounts? Nobody knows. I mean, I think the same principle applies. Be happy in today. What you have today is everything. Maybe I'm not going to breathe after this second. Then why money? Why power? I think love your fellow mates and do good to everybody. That's the mantra.
May
And
God
it will
bless.
come back to you.
That's never a question that what will happen in the next breath. But in any case, your last question from me, and then we move to Professor Rekha Jagannath, who is around, and seek a comment and question if she has. What's your advice to youth and students?
This is our favorite question, you know, this is our job. We keep doing all the time. So regarding youth, I believe that, you know, I think we have to accept the fact that our youth is much more informed. They are much more smarter than the previous generation, and they are technically much better than we used to be at our times. And they're quite, you know, aware of what they're doing, where they're going. They are very, very well-informed people. But you know, I am very surprised at the fact that in this crisis also, the major question that bothers our youth today is whether I'll get a job. You know, my students who are now about to finish their thesis, their questions are, ma'am, will I get a job in India, or should I try abroad? Should I go to Germany? Should I go to US? I mean, if your basic concern is this, my appeal, you know, to the young people would be to, you know, yeah, this is the time to develop skills. Of course, this is the time when you should have a professional degree, so that if somebody has a job, at least you are capable for it. So make yourself capable. That is very important. But you know, I believe that this sort of a crisis which we are right now is actually the time to display our qualities of mental strength and endurance. And you know, if you ask me, I believe it's not so much on the youth, but it also reflects on our generation. What sort of values have we inculcated in our youngsters? What have we taught them? Have we taught them that money and power is everything? Or have we taught them to balance life out? Have we taught them the Indian traditional wisdom? I believe in such a situation, you know, intelligence quotient and emotional quotient have to be balanced. If intelligent quotient, if I say intelligent quotient in quotient, then I think it has to come from you know, it will find its way through the best use of technology. But emotional quotient is something which has to be driven from the traditional Indian values, traditional Indian ways of life, traditional Indian wisdom that we always have been embarking upon and going back to it for finding solutions even in the contemporary times. And you know, you and I have grown in times where we have seen, you know, I was born, when I was born, our house did not have a TV. But right now, if I don't have a TV in each one of my rooms, it's difficult to live. I mean, the life has been changing really fast. So I believe for the youngsters today, you know, education is actually no more a social or economic issue. It has actually become a national security issue. We need people who are well formed and, you know, who are intelligent or wise enough rather to take the situation as it is and do something with whatever constraints and situations they are in. You know, I believe for youth, uh, what I should be saying is that tough times don't last, but tough people do. So you know, we have to, the same principle of anti-fragile, that you'll have to grow better in the difficult situations. So I think three principles which I will list for the students would be trust. First one is trust on your own knowledge, on your own skill, and on your own Indian systems of education and wisdom. trust your parents, and be self-reliant in this mode where we are right now. Probably there may be shortages of jobs. It is natural because we are in that kind of a situation. We can't close our eyes on the fact that everything in the whole globe is showing those kind of sequences. But so be self-reliant and believe in startups, believe in things where you can be actually an entrepreneur and help others to actually get job under you. And the third thing, which I think is the most critical for Indian uh, students and Indian intellectuals, is control brain drain for some time, be back to your nation and serve your nation well first, because this is the time to show your nationalism, show that you really care about your country, show that you really care about your own land.
Very well said. And I will now be opening up the house. I will go to Professor Rekha Jagannathan first, and then I'll go to the others. After that, Dr. Salim Andrews is here, and then Dr. Professor Junzo Vatada. Just a second.
Hello, Arti, and hello, Professor Raman. Very happy that you reconfirmed on the beauty of nature performing better than usual during COVID. And in the light of COVID, it's the biggest lesson ever for Indian economy and the world as well. Ganga, water is flowing cleaner.
Yes,
And then more fauna and flora performing better. Actually, this is amazing. This is the happiest moment that way. But then, along with this, we have Purushartha stated back in our tradition, Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. It's not only the beauty of happiness, we also have to have Artha. Its most important part that Professor Aman Agarwal mentioned, that we have come back decades. Actually, we have come to 1.9%. That's the official data right now in growth rates. So we have to strike a balance between this beauty of nature performing very well and then our very low growth rates, where our Bangalore's N.R. Narayan Murthy has stated we have to work for 12 hours per day for 2-3 years to make up the loss. Where you made another beautiful point that we have to go to AI, we have to go to ICT to perform better and make up the loss. We have gone back decades. We have to come forward. We have to use these super technologies. And basically, to go ahead, the spirits of the people have to be positive. And in this direction, for us, it's easier to say we have to be enthusiastic, we have to move ahead, our youth have to perform better. But then, for all these, there is universal basic income which is necessary. And that is the most important aspect, which should be government's concern right away, I feel. So there should be policy changes in this direction, where there should be restatement of both economic policy and then sustainability policy. And our economic policy should be an admixture of sustainability. First of all, spirituality, next sustainability, and then economic forces all together. There should be restatement of all economic policies. I don't know what you feel about it. And then basic income security should be provided right away. It's very necessary. Instead of dealing with migrant laborers separately, poorest people separately, the lowest category women separately, altogether we could provide universal basic income, which we are capable of right now, and then move ahead, striking a balance between sustainability and the growth rate we have to achieve. Actually, growth rate is fine, but then a bit of low growth rate is also okay with us as far as distribution is fair enough. So where is this point? We have to look into very fast and then get along moving ahead in that speed of operation. That's what I feel. I don't know what you as an youngster feel. And then you have made very important points actually connected to all these aspects. But I'd like you to see it in a nutshell as a combination of these three aspects: spirituality, sustainability, and then economic growth rate. I don't know what you...
I fully agree with you.
But then coming down to the point of happiness index, we cannot index happiness at all. And you were thinking of it when you said happiness. Is it billions of rupees, or is it counting your employment level, status quo and all this, and you totally categorically said, no, it is not all these. But while saying it is not all these, we also have to come to the essence of life, where essence is striking the balance, which also you mentioned. So I think it's perfect that you have struck your point of focus for a lifetime, and then we can go this way towards sustainability. I wish you good luck. That's
Thank you so much.
fine enough for a planner and architect as well. I wonder whether you are an architect, but then yeah, no.
Architect. I'm an architect, but then I have my specialization and doctorate in landscape architecture, which where we outdoors, and it's more to do with ecology and environment.
So landscape is more practical, as you said. It's at the moment. Now, at present, you deal with the present, but then planning deals with long-term perspective of life. So you have developed both the spiritual aspect of it, with which we have to go ahead in the long run, and then in the short run, we have to stick to materialistic basics of materialism. Also, we cannot be in the skies and live on the earth. That's so that's the best approach to life, I guess.
That's true. Thank you for your words of wisdom. Yeah.
Thank you.
Member of the Karnataka State Planning Board, and she's also a professor. In any case, I'll move on to Salim. I think is having some trouble with his video, so I'll move to Junzo as of now, and if Junzo can ask his question. Junzo. Professor Junzo Watada is a former professor from Waseda University, Japan, and currently is a professor at Petronas University in Malaysia. Go ahead, Junzo, please.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Alti. Nice talk. I have many questions, but some questions are quite difficult for you to answer. So the easy one.
Okay.
Sometimes our difficulty or unhappy in the past make us grow more, provided happiness. So can you share some unhappiness or difficulties you experienced which influenced your present happiness? Of course, the happiness and the difficulty are different. Either way, you can share with us.
Sure. So I think what you're asking me is that I should give you some examples of how my happiness has made my present what it is.
Yeah, in the past experiences.
All right. I think, thank you so much, sir. That's a very difficult question, actually. But, you know, if you ask me, I think for any individual, 3 things which make him happy, and the same 3 things which make me also happy when, you know, your mother feels that you have grown up as an individual and a professional, and she feels proud on you. So my mother has felt proud on me many times. This makes me happy. Then the second thing is that the place you work, if that feels happy about your prosperity and your way of handling things, if they acknowledge your work, that makes you happy. So since I do good at my work, this gives me a lot of happiness. And the third thing which brings happiness to me is as a professional, you know, I have a twofold job. One is that I do projects, you know, I construct and I build projects on ground, you know, and the second is that I teach students. So both these things are, you know, are sources of extreme happiness to me. You know, an architect or a landscape architect is best happy when he can see his things getting built on the ground, and that feeling is ecstasy, believe me. When what you had done as a drawing, what you had done as a series of, you know, GFPs, they just go and build on the site. So that's ecstasy for me. That gives me the most happiness. And the next thing, which as a faculty, I believe, you know, when you touch the lives of your students in some bit way, you teach them and they recognize your contribution in their lives, and you find that you played a little role in shaping up their careers, and see them blossoming into, you know, in various MNCs, they are doing good and they are earning probably 10 times that I am earning. That gives me a real happiness. And, you know, people call up on days like my birthday and 5th September when it's Teachers' Day, and they call up and tell, ma'am, you know, I was wanting to talk to you so long, but now today I thought was the day to come back to you and say that I really miss you and I want to talk to you more. That kind of dialogue with my students when they go out, but still don't forget you, that is immense pleasure.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question.
Sure, sir.
So the sometimes Professor Amand told mantra future. By the way, what's the direction of your future to build more happy situation for you?
As in, you are saying, how am I looking at my future?
Yes, how are you looking at?
There are many directions, but you may select the most happiest direction. Which is the happiest direction for you?
Oh, it seems as if I'm talking to one of my elder brothers or my father, who's asking me, how are you looking at your life growing in the next years to come? But that's really, I mean, I feel really delighted at this, and I'll definitely want to answer this one, sir, but it'll become very personal. But
this is my most question I would like to ask, but it is hard because the gender, I think in India, even in Japan, women has much labor comparing with male people.
That's true. That's true.
But also, women cannot decide by themselves. Very much many decisions might be done by male people. So I would like to ask this one, but it is hard for you to answer. So I hesitate to ask you.
You can share.
Anyway, it's okay. I understood your answer. You should ask your parents or husband or other persons for your future happiness.
Sir, okay, I'll try to answer this as possible as I can answer it. Okay, let me start from the point that you said in India, women actually have to look at other people to decide for their happiness. You know, partly that's true because, you know, we have had a long history of gender stories. I mean, where, you know, the narrative has started from the, if you know about our history, from 5,000 years back when we were in the Vedic age, you know, those times, and from then to, you know, series of time, there is a timeline that our women also have kind of prosperous through, and their status also has been changing. You know, if you look at how we access happiness, there have been times in history where women were not even allowed to look at the sun. They were like in the rooms, inside the houses only. And, you know, there is a scripture by Panini which says, Asurya Pasham Darha, which meant the wives of the kings which don't even see the sun. So that was our condition in some 1,000 years back. But then slowly and slowly the relation changed. You know, we were excluded completely from the outdoors. We were not able to participate in the public life at all. So that was a time of pure exclusion. And then, you know, through history, I have read that we reached to a stage where we were allowed partially. Then, you know, especially if I talk about the Mughal era, you see these, you know, special places for women to go. Like there are, you know, there are ghats and there are parks, special parks for women, which were called as Zinana Bagh. I mean, Zinana means female, women. So those kind of situations occurred. So I am saying that, okay, if you registered that one as exclusion, then this became seclusion. You were there, but you were secluded. And today, I believe that we have actually crossed all this, and we are right at the junction, and rather actually inside the whole bracket, where we are mostly included in the public domain, in public decisions, in all the policy making situation, and at house front, everywhere. I have a little different opinion on how, we are a patriarchal society, and we will take time to, break this chain and come out of it completely. But if you and Professor Aman will agree with me on this, that it seems that men control, but ultimately with our delicacies, with our smiles, women actually control the whole world. I think so.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Aarti. Thank you.
But at least if you can outline 1 or 2 lines on how do you think you intend to induce happiness in your future?
So, I'm a happy person. So whatever I do, I feel I can find happiness. And, I am doing some really good work in my profession right now. And, I love writing, reading, teaching, and, producing good work. That's all which life has, bestowed me with. And in the future also, I continue to do that. And already I have kind of attained a good degree and a good education, but I intend to do a postdoctoral maybe in Japan sometime, and will be with you, sir.
Sure, thank you. I will be moving on to the next question. Professor Dr. Yamini Agarwal, if you can ask the question.
Good afternoon, Dr. Aarti.
Hi, Yamini ji.
Hi. My question to you is that, architectural delights like temples, tombs, or other monuments in any country or society speak a lot of the meaning of life and essence of life they project for themselves and for the outside world. In your opinion, what would be the priorities of the architects today to add more meaning or a better cultural delight to the entire economy?
Excellent. It's a very intelligent question, I must say. And it comes from an economist, and looking at what I do, I'll try to answer this. As far as I see, natural and cultural heritage, 2 things which are very, very critical for any nation. And as a society also, it's very important of how we take cognizance of these 2 things. If you see, the natural and cultural heritage has also got economic value attached to it. When you do your livability index calculations or happiness quotient or happiness index calculations also, the happiest countries or places are those which take care of natural and heritage conservation aspects into it. And that's actually true with a lot of countries like Finland and Denmark. They have actually calculated that indices keeping in account the cultural heritage and natural heritage of these places. And there is and that's why I believe these subjects of landscape economics and happiness economics, they're all coming up as the mainstream education fields. So because we definitely have made sure that in India, of course, this field is still in its nascent stages, and we are still making frameworks to study these kind of knowledge domain. But you're right in saying that our job as architects and our job as planner architects is especially to make sure that we make our first we make buildings which project our culture. And right now we are in a stage of eclecticism. There have been phases where we used to have Dravidian temples, we used to have North Indian temples, Gujarat provincial temples and architecture. But today is actually a time when it is all mixed. There is no clear vocabulary to architecture right now. We kind of bracket it into modern and contemporary architecture, but we are picking up everything from everywhere and making something that looks good to our eyes. So yes, that culture has to see a paradigm shift, and we have to go back to some sort of defined framework of doing architecture today. But as far as your question of should be respected, how should we take that into cognizance, I believe you're right that unless we take all this into cognizance as a part of economy, and as a, because there is research which says that I don't exactly remember the figure, but I think it says that the natural heritage of the world at this point of time is 30,000 trillion US dollars or something like that, which means that there is method to calculate the related economy of the heritage and natural sector. So I think that's the way forward, where we should actually believe in understanding the evaluation, economic valuation of these assets and add them to the economy per se.
Thank you. I'll go to last two questions for today, Ashok Laha, and then to Dr. Poonam Saini. So I'll first go to Ashok, and then I'll go to Poonam at the end. Ashok, kindly ask the question.
Aarti, it's a wonderful presentation you have made it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'll change the topic a little bit.
Sure.
I'm from the software background. I run a software company. I never studied your domain. Now you mentioned about the technology. You mentioned about the artificial intelligence. You have mentioned mobile. Now, most of the industries today, they're using software to make it faster, quality better, and development cost is less. Now, I don't know anything about your industry. So can you help me how to understand how can I use artificial intelligence, mobile, or machine learning, or some other, how can I bring the software to industry to make your industry, is there any application there to use the software?
So you are asking if there is any technical softwares and stuff which help us as professionals.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes, sir. Of course, we these days have also become really, state of the art kind of products and softwares we have. When I was growing, we relied on hand drafting. We didn't have computers at that point of time. And I remember when I was in my final year of architecture, that was the first time that I saw people drafting on computers in my hostel. And I was surprised to see how can she make a drawing on a computer, because I didn't have a computer at that point of time. But if you see today, sir, education has really redefined itself in this era of artificial learning and, virtual learning, flexible learning, and smart teaching. Today our classrooms also present a completely different landscape. All these students who we have as our students at this point of time, they have, their personal laptops. They have touch screen gadgets which are smarter than ours, and so they know much better than we know. But my issue with I'll break this question into two. One is that since I work, so my profession as a professional, as a person who makes landscapes, and the other as a faculty. First, I'd like to take as a faculty how this, modern softwares have helped us. If you see research, it says it's 17% more efficient, it's 50% more engaging, and it's 50% cost effective, the systems which we are using these days of flexible learning and all. But the only worry which kind of scares me sometimes is that we deal with young minds. Of course, I teach a postgraduate course that these are still 25 to 30 years of age, general age group. But even architects who are like freshers from their 12th, and they also use all these techniques. My issue is the issue of plenty. Just at the click of a button, they get exposed to so much information on the internet. Like if I am teaching them in the class, they have a smartphone to quickly assess whether I'm telling them the right thing or not. And okay, that's also fine. They should do that. But my worry is, while they access this information, are they really capable at this tender age to convert that information into the right form of knowledge? Because, as this is happening, our role as teachers also has been changing. You know, earlier we used to have only lectures and our classrooms and studios where we used to teach them how to design. Now our role has actually shifted. Sometimes we become facilitators. Sometimes we reduce our roles to only guides. Sometimes we only streamline their path. And sometimes we go back to our old school of teaching where we take lectures, long talks, counseling, and so on. So my worry is that there should be certain, like in your when you watch these smart TVs on Netflix and Amazon Prime and all this, you have parental control. So I believe on internet also there should be a teacher's control, that this the student can access, this the student can't access, because that is probably the problem at this point of time. Now coming to the second part of the question, as a landscape professional, as an architect, how do I see technology coming into my profession? So we have excellent softwares these days. For example, my work is to do, you know, I do large sites. For example, if I do a large watershed, for example, 1200 acre site or 1500 acre site, I'm doing a township, then, and especially if it is in a hilly area, then my first job is to assess where to build. You know, I belong to the McCargian philosophy of landscape architecture, which is actually of ecological planning, that you plan ecologically, you see where to do what. And there is actually where the process has to start, which doesn't unfortunately in these times start, because the developer takes it all and the landscape architects are taken in later, which is not really the way. If you ask me, I have another separate 1-hour talk on this I can deliver, but let's keep it aside. And I'll tell you that there are softwares to talk about, to actually give me a total grading plan. Grading, I mean, land forming, land shaping, where the water should move, where should I have roads, where should I have my residentials, where should I put my recreational areas, where should the water bodies be. So this land water vegetation relationship, as I know, the softwares also know. But the only thing is, the catch again is fixing of certain parameters. So our roles as faculties and professionals has really changed in this era of technology.
Do you see the artificial intelligence coming in your field? Artificial intelligence?
Sir, we are right at the door of it. I mean, it's coming in. I mean, if, there was a discourse I was hearing to some debate some time back, they were saying if artificial intelligence comes in, like it has already, you know, started to establish, then the teachers are going to lose their jobs. So, but yeah, it is coming. Let's see where it goes.
Just to add on before I call Poonam Saini to ask a question now. Ashok, you know, it's a big debate and it's been going on at Harvard and a couple of other universities. Are we looking at complete eradication of the teaching community? On the other hand, in the US in particular, this term called guru is something like a padvi. It's like the Padam Shri or the Padma Bhushan, which one gets, is when an American professor or a European professor, he gets to be termed a guru, and that's in the true sense of it. So the importance of, you know, what one can communicate on a personal basis, even today cannot be done. You can have transfer of knowledge, you know, not knowledge, but information through AI and deliver it at a much faster speed, give the accessibility, but then to connect it and to build it up in the whole sense as a full perspective, to bring it up. Like, you know, when we're holding these sessions of Essence of Life, when we bring in people from different walks of life, we had you as well. So every one of you gives in a different dimension. As you know, the Rig Veda quote said, let noble thoughts come to us from every side. And this is where the human, you know, capability is much beyond the AI, in my opinion, is that capturing that information from different walks of life, like this Hollywood actress brought in a story from her old young age. Then we had Adkam who came and said yesterday that, you know, from a young age when I started, I had to start thinking I wanted to be a scientist, I wanted to do this, you know, which artificial intelligence cannot calibrate looking at what we are or the expressions we get from the other. The AI will answer you exactly what you're looking for in the precisest manner, looking at the data and searching all the data, but not looking at that emotional quotient factor which she talked about, that we need to have both IQ and EQ taken together. The IQ can be answered, but not the EQ, in my opinion. With AI, maybe time may change tomorrow, and as they show in these Star Wars movies, where you have highly sufficient and very efficient robots who can actually play around with human emotion as well. Maybe, but as of today, even though Japan has these robots which people live with, in fact, day to day. But even today, we are not seeing such high level of AI so far. And in fact, Britain I heard a news in BBC the other day about a month and a half back, where Britain has the AI to actually use for defense, but they're scared that if the AI takes a detection and takes an order by itself, then they can't even control it. So it's not controllable as of now when it comes to even defense. So controlling that AI to be able to benefit the human race per se is still a big question. I don't know, you're a software guy, you live your life, you're building people's life with softwares and AI-based systems, may have a different perspective, but then at least as a teacher, I still feel that talk, something which I can do in my class, talking with my students. We've been doing classes on Zoom and others, but still that particular personal connect is not there. You can get informal, like one of my students fell ill and she was having acidity problem. So I said, it seems you're going to a lot of parties with your husband and child lately, and that's why you're eating too much of food outside. And she said, yes. Now that I can't do when I'm doing a class on the Zoom, because it's all getting recorded. And I don't know if I'm recording it or someone else is recording it. And I don't want that kind of a personal information going up out tomorrow and someone coming and claiming that you have done me too here. So I don't want that kind of a thing happening and destroying me as person. And that's where that personal link, that personal connect can only happen when you have a human interaction. And we've done so many talks on this, and you agree with me on that, despite the fact that you're a software guy.
No, I think, Pali, I agree with you. Overall, AI, AI is the technology today, but it will never replace human being. Only thing what will happen, it will improve the quality of what you deliver. And human brain cannot be put in an algorithm by which AI can develop it. I fully agree with it.
Thank you, Ashok. In any case, Ashok is the CEO, founder, president, and CEO of Intera IT, which is a US-based company and has a huge office in India as well, doing a lot of work. I'll now go to Dr. Poonam Saini, and as I believe in a 360 review, and I understand these angles are close to each other. So I thought, why don't I bring in a colleague of hers as well, who happens to be on our platform today, and maybe she has been there a couple of times before. So maybe I bring in that, because in economics and in finance, we do all this kind of 360-degree and the BCG matrix and stuff like that. I thought, why don't we have Dr. Poonam Saini also ask a question? Dr. Saini.
Hi. Dr. Aarti, first of all, I would like to thank you for sharing your thoughts on Essence of Life from a wider perspective of nature and landscape. So since you are into imparting professional education, so can you throw some light on quality of education in India? I mean, what can be done to make young students into skilled professionals with right education? As a teacher, how do you see your role in imparting quality education? That's my question to you.
Okay. Thank you, Poonam, for the question. We've briefly talked about this earlier, but as a long-term strategy for the youth in terms of education, okay, I'll start by saying that what is most important for a nation is how they deal with the human capital, and in our case, it is all the more important because our average age or median age of the nation at this point of time is 28 years of age, which means that 1 billion of our population around is in the productive phase, is in the productive bracket. So if we want good professionals, if we want them to flourish into really good scientists, professionals, or economists, or even landscape architects, then we need to build on 3 to 4 things, which I believe are very, very critical in the current scenario. One, I believe, is their employability. We are looking at quantitative. We have at this point of time 1.5 million schools in the country. and we have around more than 50,000 colleges and universities operating right in at this point of time in the country. But how concerned are we about the quality of education at this point of time? So you're right that quality of education is also equally important. You know, according to the Global Innovation Index 2016, India is ranked 118th in the quality of education. So that says it all. I mean, we have a lot of scope where we can we have all these things which we can bring into, you know, R&D sector. We need to enhance a little more because we are doing a lot, yet there is scope that we can do more. Second, as earlier said, technology is one thing which I think we can depend more on. Of course, we just had a discussion of how technology can't replace human beings and human teachers, but still, nevertheless, technology is important, and we need to go the way the world is going. We can't just ignore and close our eyes on the fact that, okay, we are a human-centric country and we won't take the technology path. That's not correct. And you know, the other important thing is that we make our students skilled enough and wise enough and employable enough.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sani and Dr. Aarti Grover for this interactive session. I will be ending the session in another 2 minutes. I'd like to announce what we have in store for today and tomorrow. Let me just let you know that today in the afternoon we have a session by a leadership coach who is Åsa from Sweden. She will be speaking to us on the leadership to uncertain times. We are going to use the same ID as the one now, that is 4 times 9 321 585 as the meeting ID for the meeting which is there. We already have over 574 registrants for her webinar. In any case, we have the room space which we had expanded last week for accommodating as many people as they want to come. This is a free webinar which is going to happen in the afternoon as well. And she is been in this profession for a long time. Then tomorrow morning, like Aarti, we have another young dynamic girl who is coming on the show. She is Dr. Blossom Kocher. I understand, I have known her for a long time, but then I did not know that how famous she was till recently when my wife told me about her after she saw a photograph of mine with her, and then she said, "How do you know her?" And that's when I learned a little bit more about her and her being famous within the women community and the fashion and the hairdressing community in the country. So we are going to look at her from an entrepreneurial perspective, a person who deals with life, who changes and shapes life with her artwork, like we saw one by one was doing landscaping today. Then in the afternoon tomorrow, we have a training session on how to do research by Dr. Yamini Agarwal. Some of you saw her ask a question today. She'll be giving that webinar from 4 to 5. And so this is something which we have in store for all of you in today and tomorrow. We have also, after Blossom on Saturday, Dr. Shobna Narayanan, Padamshri Dr. Shobna Narayanan, who is a classical dancer, coming on our program on Saturday afternoon at 12 o'clock. So with that, I'd like to thank all for having joined us and being with us. Thank you, Aarti, for sparing your time and sharing your views. Namaskar.
Thank you.
Stay.